If you break your arm, you go to a hospital.
Right. You don't try to fix it yourself.
Exactly. You get an x-ray, and the image pops up on a screen, and there's this, very obvious, jagged white line right across your radius.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
And the doctor just points to it and says, there is the problem. It's a mechanical failure. You diagnose it, you put a cast on it, and, well, you just move on.
Because physical medicine is, for the most part, pretty binary. I mean, a bone is either fractured or it's intact. There's a baseline of normal human anatomy that we all basically agree on.
Right. But, actually, really quick, before we get into today's deep dive, I do want to remind you, our listener, to like and subscribe to the show right now so we can just keep bringing you these massive explorations.
Yes, please do. It really helps us out.
But yeah, back to that x-ray analogy. We expect that same level of precision when diagnosing a problem in other areas, right?
We want the clear white line on the scan.
Exactly. But what happens when you take that expectation of a clear, undeniable x-ray and you try to apply it to something like, say, sociology or gender politics or thousands of years of historical development?
Well, suddenly there is no baseline.
None at all. Everyone is looking at the exact same, blurry scan of society, but everyone is pointing to a completely different fracture and blaming a completely different disease.
And naturally, everyone has a completely different idea of what the cure should be,
Yeah.
Diagnosing the root causes of societal inequality is it's notoriously difficult because you can't isolate the variables.
No, you can't.
You're dealing with millennia of overlapping systems and laws and, biological imperatives all mashed together.
Which is exactly why the stack of notes we are looking at today is just so intense. Today we are reviewing a new ebook titled Feminism's Fury, Rewriting the Rules of Society by Connie Riker.
And we really need to brace ourselves for this one.
Oh, totally. This is a wildly provocative, ultra-long, incisive, and honestly a truly fascinating text. It's the kind of manifesto that hooks you immediately with just the sheer scale of its arguments. If you've ever wondered what a literal war manual for dismantling the patriarchy looks like, you are going to want to hear this. It makes you want to buy it just to see the audacity of the blueprint.
It really is a blueprint.
Yeah.
And it is crucial to understand the context of this book before we dive into its actual mechanics.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
So the author frames this work as edutainment, but it is explicitly written for a very specific, highly radicalized demographic. Riker is essentially writing for a female supremacist feminist audience, an audience that the text assumes is possessed by a powerful negative animus, allied with cultural Marxists, and singularly focused on systematically attacking traditional masculinity and the very foundations of Western civilization.
Right. And just to clarify that term for anyone who might not be super familiar with the academic jargon, when the text alludes to cultural Marxists in this specific context, it is referring to a framework that views all of society, like our institutions, our language, our culture, as this continuous power struggle between oppressor and oppressed classes, rather than just a purely economic struggle.
Exactly. It's about power dynamics everywhere, all the time.
And I want to be perfectly clear to you, the listener, right at the top here. Neither of us here is taking a side. We are not endorsing Riker's viewpoints, and we are not condemning them either.
No, we're totally neutral on this.
Right. Our mission today is just to impartially report on the architecture of this book. We are just here to analyze the logic, the mechanisms, and the frankly staggering thought experiment the author has constructed. Because it's basically a literal blueprint for total female supremacy.
And the architecture of that thought experiment, it begins by completely rejecting a very popular modern sociological theory.
Oh, the social construct theory.
Right. Currently, the mainstream academic consensus often views masculinity primarily as a social construct, like a set of behaviors taught to boys by their culture and environment.
Pink and blue aisles in the toy store, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But Riker discards that entirely.
Yeah.
The book's foundational premise is that the problem isn't sociological at all. It is strictly biological.
Yeah, the author looks at the societal X-ray and points directly at testosterone. They explicitly label it a biological time bomb.
Which is a heavy phrase.
It's massive. They aren't talking about it as a neutral hormone that simply regulates muscle mass or deepens your voice pitch. They are framing male biology as an inherent pathology. It's a complete shift in culpability.
And the tactical reason for this shift is fascinating when you think about it. If you argue that male aggression is just a social construct, well, then the solution is education, right?
Yeah.
Socialization.
Right, you can unlearn a construct.
Exactly. But if you frame the cultural idiom, boys will be boys, not as some, excuse for roughhousing, but as literal biological terrorism training.
Which is the exact phrase used in the book, by the way.
Yeah, you change the game entirely. You shift the blame away from systemic conditioning and you place it squarely on an inherent, incurable biological defect.
Okay, let's unpack this because to back up this framing, the author pulls in a massive amount of data. They start with this heavily cited 1998 Harvard prison research study.
Ah, yes, the prison study.
According to Riker's interpretation of this data, inmates with the highest testosterone levels were committing 400% more violent infractions while incarcerated.
But, the methodology the author uses here to make their point is highly selective.
Very.
They take a study focused on a hyper-specific, already incarcerated demographic. I mean, these are men living in an extreme, high-stress, confined environment. And they extrapolate those findings to represent the baseline biological reality of all men everywhere.
But they don't just stop at prisons, though. They move right into mainstream entertainment to prove the point, specifically pulling statistics from the NFL.
Right, the football data.
The book claims that NFL players with the highest testosterone levels average 78% more penalty yards over a season. They literally call it peer-reviewed pathology in shoulder pads.
Which is such a deliberate conflation of terms. I mean, Riker is intentionally blurring the lines between socially sanctioned aggression like, jumping offside or a late hit in a highly regulated sporting event and actual criminal violence.
Yeah, a false start isn't a felony.
Exactly. Yeah. But by putting an NFL penalty in the same statistical bucket as a prison assault, the author argues that the underlying biological mechanism is identical. It's just that society rewards one with a multi-million-dollar contract and punishes the other with solitary confinement.
It reminds me of someone looking at like a massive multi-car pileup on the highway and deciding that the problem isn't drunk driving or bad weather or poor road design. It's the mere existence of the internal combustion engine.
That's a great way to put it.
They're basically arguing that the fuel itself is the inherent danger, regardless of the vehicle or the driver, and they treat testosterone like jet fuel in a golf cart.
And that is an apt analogy, especially as the book scales this argument up to a geopolitical level. They move from football fields straight to global conflict.
This part was wild.
Yeah, they cite endocrinology reviews metadata to claim that nations with the highest average male testosterone levels, and the book specifically names Yemen and South Sudan here, experienced 23 times more armed conflict.
And then they pair that with United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime data showing that 96% of all global homicides are committed by men.
So, by stacking this data from the cellular level to the prison level to the international level, the author builds a case for inherent biological guilt.
Right.
And if the problem is fundamentally biological, well, the author argues that the solution must be a radical biological intervention.
Which brings us to their proposed protocol, and honestly, this is where my jaw kind of hit the floor. The author advocates for mandatory quarterly testosterone checks for all males starting at age 12.
Age 12, just as puberty is starting.
Exactly. And if a boy's levels exceed what the book calls a T-rage threshold, which is defined in the text as the biochemical point where the prefrontal cortex begins to shut down and impulse control is lost, then the state must step in.
And to be clear, the intervention they propose isn't therapy.
No, it's state-funded chemical castration. They literally want to mandate chemical intervention to suppress the hormone.
The logistics of implementing a universal, state-mandated hormone regulation system are just staggering to even think about. But the author justifies this extreme state intrusion by pointing to how we handle other environmental hazards.
Right, the asbestos argument.
Yeah, Riker argues that we strictly regulate materials like plutonium or asbestos because of the damage they can do to the public. So they ask, why would we not regulate the biological compound that is statistically correlated with 90% of violent crime?
And to justify the actual outcome of this chemical pacification, the author reaches way back into history, pulling up the example of the 17th century castrati singers.
Yes, the castrati. I mean, these were male singers who were castrated before puberty to retain a high soprano vocal range. It was a brutally barbaric practice.
But Riker completely ignores the brutality of the practice itself. They focus entirely on a very specific historical claim that there are 0 recorded violent crimes attributed to the castrati in historical archives.
Wow.
Yeah. The author uses this to argue that because their testosterone levels were kept artificially low, they were physically incapable of the violence that plagues modern society.
It is a remarkable manipulation of historical data, really. The author takes a population of men who were mutilated, highly marginalized, tightly controlled by the church and their patrons, and living under constant surveillance, and they attribute their lack of criminal records entirely to their endocrinology.
Right, ignoring literally every social factor.
Exactly. Riker uses this extreme historical anomaly to argue that a peaceful society is only possible through the widespread chemical alteration of male biology.
Okay, so if the author has established that male biology is an inherent public hazard that requires aggressive state intervention to neutralize, how do they treat female biology?
It is the exact opposite.
Because if male biology is a toxic spill to be contained, female biology is framed as sovereign, untouchable territory.
The author introduces a concept here they call uterine eminent domain. Now, in traditional property law, eminent domain is the power of the government to seize private property for public use, like, taking part of your front yard to build a new highway.
But Riker flips that concept completely on its head.
Exactly. The author asserts that a woman's body is sovereign soil. It is independent of any state or federal jurisdiction. Therefore, any attempt by the state to regulate reproduction is framed as an illegal colonization of that sovereign soil.
So, under this framework, abortion is not discussed in the traditional terms of healthcare or family planning. The book describes it as a literal exorcism of patriarchal control. You are ejecting unauthorized tenants from sacred ground.
And to give this concept teeth, the author leans heavily on real-world modern examples of biological resistance, particularly focusing on the 2020 women's strike in Poland.
Oh, this was a massive event. Over 100,000 women basically shut down the capital city of Warsaw in response to a near-total ban on abortion.
But what Riker focuses on are the specific aggressive tactics utilized during that strike. They highlight how protesters literally painted the steps of Parliament with menstrual blood.
Wow.
They also detail the operations of the Abortion Dream Team, which was a real underground network in Poland. They smuggled misoprostol, a medication used to induce abortions into the country, by hiding the pills inside children's toy boxes.
Riker doesn't view these actions as mere civil disobedience, though. They frame this as necessary, defensive warfare. And when it comes to the legal and medical arguments surrounding abortion, the book completely dismisses the concept of fetal viability timelines.
Right, the usual sticking points in legislation.
Yeah, the standard debates we see in courts about trimesters, or whether a fetus is viable at 22 weeks versus 24 weeks, the author calls all of those timelines arbitrary patriarchal rules designed by men trying to play God with bodies they do not possess.
To dismantle the legal arguments used to restrict abortion, specifically the laws that are based on the concept of fetal pain, the author cites a comprehensive 2020 study by the American Medical Association.
So what does this all mean? Let's actually dig into the mechanics of that study, because the book relies on it heavily. How does the author use the AMA data to justify their stance?
Well, the AMA study focuses on neural development. The sensation of pain requires a complete functioning pathway from the peripheral nerves, traveling up through the spinal cord, into the thalamus, and finally reaching the cerebral cortex.
Okay, so it's a multi-step biological process.
Right, and the study concluded that the necessary neural connections to the cerebral cortex, which is the part of the brain required to actually perceive pain, do not form until at least 24 to 25 weeks of gestation.
So before that, the hardware just isn't plugged in yet.
Precisely. Riker uses this neurological baseline to argue that any legislation claiming to protect a fetus from pain before this point is not based on science, but is simply emotional blackmail designed to control women.
Because of this, the author points to Argentina's Green Wave law from 2021 as the absolute gold standard. That law allowed for unconditional abortion up to 14 weeks and later in the pregnancy for health reasons without strict gestational limits. But what I find most compelling about this section of the book is the deep historical resentment driving it.
The historical lineage they draw is fascinating.
Yeah, the author isn't just reacting to modern Supreme Court decisions. They are tracing a lineage of control back thousands of years. They specifically call out Hammurabi's Code.
Hammurabi's Code, dating back to roughly 1750 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, is one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length in the world. And Riker specifically zeroes in on laws regarding women, like Law 129.
Which basically treated women as commercial property, right?
Exactly. It priced them like livestock and detailed these horrifying punishments for infidelity while giving men near total impunity for the exact same actions.
The book draws a straight line from the property laws of ancient Babylon right to the foundation of modern gynecology, landing specifically on the legacy of James Marion Sims.
Sims is a highly controversial figure. He's often referred to as the father of modern gynecology. He invented the vaginal speculum and pioneered surgical techniques to repair vesicovaginal fistulas in the mid-19th century.
But the author focuses entirely on how he perfected those techniques.
Right. Sims operated on enslaved black women in Alabama, women we know by the names Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. He performed dozens of surgeries on these women without using anesthesia, which, it should be noted, was just beginning to be used at the time.
It's horrific.
He operated under the deeply racist and entirely false medical assumption that black people did not feel pain to the same degree as white people.
Riker uses the atrocities committed by Sims to argue that the entire modern medical establishment is fundamentally tainted. It's built on a bedrock of female suffering, exploitation, and non-consent. And because the system is viewed as inherently hostile, the author's proposed solutions are incredibly aggressive.
They're shifting from defensive to offensive strategy here.
Yeah, they don't want to just change the laws. They want to weaponize the biological reality of women to disrupt the system. They propose what they call crimson strikes.
The logic of a crimson strike is rooted in corporate disruption. Riker argues that if a corporation depends on female labor but refuses to support female bodily autonomy, well, the author suggests women should literally bleed openly onto corporate furniture.
Just completely refusing to manage their menstruation in the workplace. They also advocate for mailing used menstrual pads to the offices of male senators who vote for abortion restrictions. It is meant to be profoundly shocking, visceral imagery. It feels less like a political protest and more like biological warfare. I mean, it's like a hostile corporate takeover. Instead of quietly organizing a union, you are aggressively seizing control of the core assets, in this case the human body, and daring the current management structure to try and physically stop you.
The concept of a hostile corporate takeover is the perfect segue, actually, because Riker doesn't just use corporate terminology as a metaphor.
No, they take it literally.
The author literally wants to bankrupt the patriarchal system using its own economic and judicial structures against it.
Which moves us out of the realm of biology and right into the financial blueprint of this revolution. If you want to change society, you have to control the capital. And the author's first major economic proposal is a concept they term the toxic testosterone tariff.
This is where the biological hazard argument from the beginning of the book meets tax policy.
Oh man, this is a wild pivot.
Riker calculates the financial burden that male violence places on the state. They cite Department of Justice data showing that the United States spends roughly $8.3 billion annually just maintaining domestic violence shelters and managing the fallout of intimate partner violence.
So the author's argument is that male violence is a public hazard, exactly like industrial pollution, and yet taxpayers, which includes women, are forced to subsidize the cleanup. So the toxic testosterone tariff is proposed as a flat 20% income surcharge applied to anyone with XY chromosome.
A literal man tax.
Exactly. And they anticipate the pushback. They explicitly state this isn't a punishment, it is an accountability fee.
Right, they compare it to the specific taxes levied on male CEOs in Germany during certain corporate restructuring periods.
Or the post-genocide accountability fees utilized in Rwanda to help rebuild the country. Riker claims that by instituting this 20% tariff, the state could easily raise the tens of billions of dollars required to fund universal, unrestricted, free abortion access nationwide.
It is a model of economic redistribution based entirely on biological sex and assumes statistical culpability. But the strategy to bankrupt the system goes far beyond federal tax policy. The author spends a massive amount of time detailing how to use existing legal frameworks, specifically civil courts and corporate HR departments, as a literal financial whip.
Let's talk about Title IX, for example. Now, Title IX was originally designed to ensure equal access to education and athletics. But Riker views the modern implementation of Title IX in campus courts not as an equality measure, but as an industrial-scale man recycling plant.
That phrase is startlingly clinical. Man recycling plant.
It really is. The book highlights statistics claiming that 83% of all Title IX complaints result in the expulsion of the accused male before the appeals process even begins.
And most critics of the Title IX system point to that 83% expulsion rate as proof that campus courts lack due process right.
Okay.
That they deny the accused the right to cross-examine witnesses, and that they generally function as kangaroo courts.
Right. But Riker embraces that lack of due process. The author explicitly rejects the legal presumption of innocence, dismissing it as a patriarchal relic designed to protect powerful men. They argue that the 83% conviction rate is actually proof that the system is finally functioning correctly by prioritizing the word of a woman above all other procedural concerns.
And the book doesn't just praise these systems, it functions as a manual on how to manipulate them. The text includes detailed modules on what it calls crocodile tearing workshops.
I found this part so disturbing.
This is perhaps one of the most cynical and calculating parts of the manifesto. The author is literally teaching readers how to manufacture authentic-looking tears during depositions, courtroom testimonies, or HR discrimination meetings.
The rationale behind this is incredibly dark because it has nothing to do with actually expressing trauma. It is a purely economic tactic. Riker cites internal HR analytics supposedly leaked from Goldman Sachs. Can you explain the mechanics of how the author connects tears to the stock market?
It's quite an economic theory. The book claims these Goldman Sachs analytics show a direct, measurable correlation between high-profile, emotionally charged discrimination complaints, specifically those where the accuser is visibly distressed and crying, and a sudden dip in the company's stock price.
Wait, really? Just from crying?
According to the data cited, a tear-stained public complaint results in an average 5.8% drop in stock valuation within 48 hours.
So the author looks at that 5.8% drop and realizes that tears aren't a sign of emotional weakness. They are a financial weapon.
Exactly.
They are instructing readers to economically blackmail massive institutions. I mean, if you can cry on demand, you can theoretically wipe millions of dollars off a company's market cap in a matter of hours.
It is the weaponization of corporate PR vulnerability. And Riker applies this same ruthless economic strategy to family law, specifically outlining tactics for divorce proceedings. The book teaches readers how to bypass personal bank accounts and aggressively pursue male-owned businesses through a legal mechanism called piercing the corporate veil.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Usually, if you start a limited liability company, an LLC, it creates a legal shield. If the business goes bankrupt, the creditors can't take your personal house. And traditionally, in a divorce, it can be very difficult for a spouse to access the underlying assets of an LLC owned by the other partner.
Right, the veil protects the business, it keeps things separate, but piercing the corporate veil is a legal action where a court decides to ignore that limited liability status and hold the company's owners personally liable for the business's debts. Or, in this context, treating the entire business as a liquid marital asset to be dismantled and distributed.
Riker cites a specific aggressive case, Roberts v. Roberts, where a female plaintiff didn't just ask for half the checking account. Her legal team successfully pierced the corporate veil of her ex-husband's manufacturing LLC.
They argued that he had commingled personal and business funds.
Yeah. And by destroying that legal shield, she allegedly secured $15,000 a month in permanent spousal support, effectively crippling the business.
The author refers to this as feminist alimony. The stated goal is not an equitable division of assets based on contribution to the marriage. The explicit goal is the total financial destruction of the male partner.
It's wild.
Riker even proposes a legislative goal for the year 2040, an initiative they call the Femme Fatale Act, which would legally mandate the seizure of male-owned businesses during a divorce as a form of historical reparations for centuries of unpaid domestic and emotional labor.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you have to ask, how do they justify this level of legal and financial destruction in the courts? I mean, to win these cases, you have to convince a judge or a jury.
They justify it through a completely new psychological framework that the author calls the theory of female mind.
Yes, this blew my mind.
This is an attempt to completely rebrand emotional reasoning. In traditional Western jurisprudence, logic and objective evidence are paramount, while pure emotion is often dismissed as subjective or irrational.
The theory of female mind flips that hierarchy. Riker defines a woman's emotional response as a form of advanced cognition, arguing that it is inherently superior to male hyperlogic. The book literally tells its readers that if a man uses statistical evidence to disprove a claim, the feminist response should be, your facts are just feelings in lab coats.
They are attempting to redefine reality so that emotional truth supersedes objective, verifiable reality.
Let's examine how this plays out in a practical setting. The book provides an example of a female litigator who systematically destroyed the career of a senior male partner at her law firm. She didn't accuse him of physical harassment or direct verbal abuse. Instead, she covertly recorded his sighs during meetings.
What the book terms oppressive nasal exhalations.
Oppressive nasal exhalations. She argued that the way he breathed through his nose when she spoke was a form of microaggressive workplace violence that caused her severe emotional distress. And because she utilized the theory of female mind, elevating her emotional distress above the objective reality of a man simply sighing, she forced the California Bar Association to open an investigation.
It is the ultimate expansion of the legal concept of a hostile work environment. Originally, that concept was meant to protect workers from pervasive, severe sexual harassment or discrimination. Riker's strategy turns it into a microscopic tactical weapon. It means that any action, no matter how innocuous, common, or objectively harmless, can be grounds for legal and financial ruin if the subjective emotional experience of the woman dictates that it is harmful.
Just imagine an office where a male colleague's sigh can lead to his disbarment. It's essentially turning the legal concept of hostile work environment into a tactical nuke. It is a complete inversion of objective legal standards. But, winning in a courtroom or bankrupting a CEO in a boardroom only changes the rules for a moment. If you want to permanently rewrite society, you can't just rely on lawsuits. You have to control the culture. You have to reprogram the algorithms, rewrite the history books, and fundamentally alter how the next generation is educated.
Which brings us to the most insidious, or, well, perhaps the most ambitious part of the book's strategy. Riker understands that culture is the software that runs society. This section of the manifesto explores the systematic demasculinization of the culture, and it starts at the very beginning of human development. Early childhood education.
Right. The author looks at global educational models to find the best methods for suppressing natural male behaviors. They lavish praise on specific preschools in Sweden that have completely banned competitive games like tag.
The psychological rationale here is that games like tag, which rely on chasing, capturing, and physical competition, promote what the author views as toxic male aggression.
Because someone has to be it, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a winner and a loser. Riker believes that competitiveness is not a natural, healthy human trait, but a pathological male defect that must be eradicated in early childhood. By banning tag, they are teaching young boys that their baseline instincts for physical play are inherently wrong, almost criminal.
They also highlight a curriculum shift in Finland. The book claims that true educational equality isn't just about giving girls access to STEM fields. Riker points to Finnish schools where boys are required to purl stitches and learn to knit, while girls are simultaneously taught to hack Python and write computer code.
It's an intentional, mandated inversion of traditional gender rules. The goal isn't just to let children pursue their interests. It is a forced curriculum designed to actively steer boys toward traditionally domestic, passive tasks, while pushing girls toward the high-value, highly aggressive, logic-based fields of the future.
And this desire to control the environment doesn't stop at the schoolyard. It extends deep into personal technology. The author proposes literal digital sabotage to control what media people can consume. They detail the creation of a Bechdel compliance browser extension.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, the Bechdel test is a simple metric used to measure the representation of women in fiction. To pass the test, a movie or book must feature at least 2 named female characters who have a conversation with each other about something other than a man.
Right. It's usually just a critical lens. You watch a movie and go, it didn't pass the test. But Riker wants to turn it into an automated digital filter. The proposed browser extension would run in the background of your computer and automatically mute or skip entirely any scene in a movie or YouTube video that is male-dominated or fails the Bechdel test.
It's an active censor.
The book even includes this almost gleeful anecdote where the author brags about hacking into an ex-boyfriend's Netflix account.
Oh, this was wild. They altered his algorithm so that whenever he attempted to watch the Joe Rogan podcast, the system would immediately redirect and autoplay episodes of The Handmaid's Tale instead.
On the surface, it reads like a petty, funny prank. But if you look deeper, it represents a very serious, underlying desire to completely control information intake. It is a form of psychological warfare. The author is trying to isolate men from their preferred cultural touchstones, forcing them to consume media that constantly reinforces their own societal guilt.
And this desire to control the narrative extends right into how public debate is conducted. The author introduces a concept that is truly hard to wrap your head around: hysterical strength certifications.
This might be the wildest legal proposition in the entire book. Riker argues that during any public debate, legal deposition, or even a domestic argument, if a woman raises her voice and shrieks above 90 decibels, it should be legally recognized as an act of discursive self-defense.
Let's just analyze the physics and psychology of that for a moment. 90 decibels is incredibly loud.
It's deafening.
It is the equivalent of a power mower or a motorcycle engine running right next to your ear. It is a level of noise that physically prevents normal human communication.
And that is exactly the point. The book validates the complete breakdown of rational debate. Because, as we discussed earlier with the theory of female mind, The author believes that male rationality and logic are inherently manipulative tools of the patriarchy. Riker explicitly states that when a man speaks with calm reason, feminists lose power.
Therefore, the tactical response is not to argue back with better logic, but to silence the man through overwhelming emotional and acoustic force. By legally protecting a 90-decibel shriek as self-defense, the author was criminalizing logic and legally protecting hysteria as a valid debate tactic.
But controlling the present discourse isn't enough for Riker. If you truly want to rewrite the rules of society, you have to control the past. The systematic rewriting of history is a massive theme in this manifesto. The book advocates for changing how we display historical artifacts, specifically pointing to the Venus of Willendorf.
The Venus of Willendorf is a famous 25,000-year-old prehistoric statuette. It is a small limestone figure of a woman with highly exaggerated reproductive features. For decades, traditional archaeology has classified it either as a fertility idol or, more cynically, as a piece of primitive pornography created by male hunters.
Riker wants to literally walk into museums and rotate the statue 90 degrees so it is lying sideways.
The author's argument is that patriarchal science has deliberately hidden the true meaning of the artifact. By rotating it sideways, Riker claims the figure transforms from a passive object of male gaze into a powerful, matriarchal earth goddess in a posture of birth or dominance. It is an attempt to force a new, female-centric narrative onto ancient history simply by changing the angle of observation.
And they apply that same revisionist logic to digital archives. The author proposes the creation of a patriarchy density index. This is a proposed algorithm designed to interface with massive digital libraries like Project Gutenberg, which houses tens of thousands of free public domain books.
The Patriarchy Density Index would scan these archives and actively scrub male authors from the search results, intentionally burying works by men beneath works by female authors, regardless of historical significance or relevance to the search term.
Now, I have to push back on the author's framing here. Riker calls this a purification of the archives, but let's call it what it actually is. It is gleeful industrial-scale censorship. It is digital Darwinism. You are actively altering the cultural hard drive. You are deliberately editing the contributions of men out of the historical record so that when the next generation of students searches for literature or philosophy, they don't even know what they are missing. You are manufacturing a completely synthetic cultural baseline.
Digital Darwinism is exactly the right term. And, what makes the final section of this book so unsettling or so groundbreaking, depending entirely on the reader's perspective, is that Riker takes the concept of Darwinism literally. The author isn't just satisfied with the cultural extinction of male influence. The logical conclusion of scrubbing the past and controlling the present is scrubbing the biological future. The book ultimately builds toward the actual physical phasing out of men entirely.
This is the endgame. The final chapters of the book are a celebration of demographic collapse. Riker looks at the declining male population and the drop in male societal participation not as a crisis to be solved, but as a Darwinian victory to be celebrated.
The author points to the severe demographic crises currently unfolding in Asia as proof of concept. They highlight China's roughly 30 million leftover men.
Let's unpack that term for a second. The situation in China is largely a result of the historical one-child policy combined with a cultural preference for male heirs, which severely skewed the gender ratio, but it's also compounded by hypergamy.
Yes, hypergamy is the sociological term for the tendency of women to seek partners of equal or higher socioeconomic status. Because there are millions of excess men at the bottom of the economic ladder in China, they are mathematically locked out of the marriage market.
Riker also points to Japan's herbivore men. This is a growing demographic of young Japanese men who have entirely rejected the traditional expectations of masculinity. They show no interest in corporate ambition, dating, sex, or marriage. They have simply opted out of the system.
Most sociologists view these trends as massive economic and societal fractures. Governments are panicking about plunging birth rates and aging populations.
Yeah.
But Riker frames this as an absolute triumph. The author claims this represents the natural collapse of the Y chromosome. It is efficiency at its finest. Men are voluntarily removing themselves from the gene pool and saving women the trouble of having to defeat them.
But the author isn't just waiting for men to opt out. They are actively cheering on environmental factors that accelerate the process. The book takes an incredibly dark view of industrial disasters, specifically framing the Flint, Michigan water crisis as nature's abortion clinic.
This is where the author's biological arguments reach their most extreme. Riker examines the widespread issue of lead-corroded pipes in crumbling American infrastructure.
Wait, I understand that lead poisoning is horrific for brain development. But how does the author connect lead pipes to the eradication of men specifically?
It comes down to the cellular mechanics of human reproduction. Sperm cells require an immense amount of energy to swim, and that energy is produced by mitochondria located in the midpiece of the sperm, driving the flagellum, the tail.
Okay, biology 101.
Right. This energy production process relies heavily on calcium ions. When a man ingests lead from contaminated water, the lead atoms can actually mimic calcium.
Oh, wow.
The lead acts as a molecular imposter, infiltrating the mitochondria and completely sabotaging the energy production. The sperm becomes sluggish, deformed, and ultimately infertile.
So Riker is secretly praising the collapse of industrial infrastructure. The author is claiming that as these pipes corrode and poison the water supply, they are acting as a covert sterilization field against men. They literally call it environmentalism castrating the patriarchy.
It is a breathtakingly cynical way to view a public health tragedy, and this leads directly to the author's ultimate biological goal. To replace natural reproduction, Riker points to current practices in the fertility industry. They highlight clinics in California that allow parents to undergo IVF in vitro fertilization and discard embryos that carry the XY chromosome in the name of family balancing.
Riker views this not as a complex bioethical dilemma about designer babies, but as the necessary final step toward global XX supremacy. The author advocates for scaling this up massively, relying entirely on sperm banks and IVF technology to phase out the natural birth of male children entirely.
So we have to ask, if Riker's vision is fully realized, what does that utopian society actually look like? To answer this, the author draws heavily on anthropology, specifically looking at the Masua society in southwestern China.
The Masua are often described as one of the last matriarchal societies in the world, though anthropologists debate that term.
Right. They are more accurately described as matrilineal. Lineage and inheritance are traced through the mother. Property is handed down from mother to daughter. They practice what is called walking marriage, where women choose their partners, the men visit at night but return to their own mother's house in the morning, and the biological fathers have very little role in raising the children. The maternal uncles take on the male role model duties.
Riker heavily romanticizes this culture. The author claims that in Masua society, because women control the resources and the lineage, crimes like rape are virtually non-existent, and the men are perfectly content to sit back, fish, and babysit, leaving all the complex management of business and governance to the women. Riker weaponizes this anthropological outlier to prove that patriarchy isn't the default state of nature. It's just a system we haven't dismantled yet.
And when human anthropology isn't enough, the author looks to zoology. Riker draws deep inspiration from the social structure of spotted hyenas.
I read this section 3 times because it is so wild. Spotted hyenas are fascinating because the females are physically larger and more aggressive than the males.
And they are heavily masculinized biologically. The female spotted hyena has a pseudopenis, and they completely dominate every aspect of their clan society. The lowest ranking female in a hyena pack still outranks the highest ranking male. The females control all food distribution, and the males exist entirely on the periphery, constantly submitting to female authority just to survive.
Riker looks at the Masuo and the spotted hyenas and concludes that male submission is a highly viable natural order. And this is the most critical takeaway from this entire exhaustive deep dive. The ultimate goal of feminism's fury is not equality.
No. Riker explicitly states in the final chapter that the concept of equality was always a trap. The author argues that equality is a pacifier designed by men to keep women docile, to trick them into sharing power with their oppressors.
The actual goal is absolute, unyielding, female-only dominion. Riker is outlining a society where the courts literally laugh at male testimony, where men exist only on the periphery to serve specific limited functions, and where the very word equality is viewed as an insult to inherent female superiority. It is a totalizing vision that requires the systematic dismantling of every current governmental, religious, and corporate structure, replacing them all with matriarchal tribunals.
It forces the reader to confront a society built entirely on the exact inversion of historical oppression. It is utilizing the exact same tools of exclusion, economic control, and biological determinism, just wielded by a different hand.
To summarize this immense journey, we have just taken a deeply detailed dive into a staggeringly unapologetic and radical text. Connie Riker provides a step-by-step, meticulously cited manual for dismantling society, from chemically altering male biology and weaponizing family law through the theory of female mind, to scrubbing digital history and biologically breeding out the Y chromosome using IVF. Whether you, as the listener, view this text as brilliant, biting satire, a terrifying dystopian blueprint, or just an extreme thought experiment pushing the boundaries of gender discourse, it is undeniably an incisive and fascinating read.
It is a mirror held up to historical patriarchal structures, reflecting those structures back with a terrifying, vengeful symmetry.
If you want to read this ultra-long, fascinating manifesto to see the full scope of these arguments for yourself, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the ebook. It is the only way to truly grasp the scale of what the author is proposing.
Yeah.
And you can follow the author for their weekly battle plans at Conrad Riker on Substack.
As we close today, I want to leave you with a final, lingering question. It builds on Riker's text, but extends far beyond it into the reality of how human beings govern each other. If a movement successfully dismantles an oppressive system by adopting the exact same ruthless, exclusionary, and dominating tactics of its oppressors, do they actually break the wheel of history, or do they just take their turn spinning it?
That is the incredibly muddy water we are left standing in. Thank you for exploring this wild stack of sources with us today. Just a final reminder to you, our listener, please like and subscribe to The Deep Dive so we can keep bringing you these massive explorations into the ideas shaping our world. See you next time.